For nearly 18 months between the dawn of 2025 and the middle of 2026, the war in Ukraine followed a brutal, predictable rhythm. On the maps, it appeared Russia held the upper hand. It was a grinding war of attrition, a village captured here, a ruined tree line occupied there. To the casual observer, Russia's progress seemed slow, almost imperceptible. Yet stacked week after week, these minor territorial gains began to bend the front line westward. Moscow pushed Ukraine, bled to delay them. But in March 2026, the machine broke. The net Russian gains didn't just slow down, they ground to a complete halt and then began to reverse. By April and May 2026, public trackers confirmed a staggering shift. Ukraine was clawing back hundreds of square kilometers. What we are witnessing today is not a temporary operational pause. It is the moment where Russia's material reserves and its propaganda narratives have collapsed simultaneously. The tank has run dry and the Kremlin has run out of excuses. In this deep dive military analysis, we look at the strategic convergence that broke Russia's offensive and how Ukraine shifted from desperate defense to setting the operational tempo of the entire war. Every military offensive relies on two fundamental elements: mobility and concealment. By early 2026, Russia lost both. The first factor was the brutal Ukrainian winter of 2025, which brought unprecedented levels of snow and moisture. When March arrived, the subsequent thaw triggered a catastrophic Rasputitsa, the mud season. Dirt roads turned into thick soup, trapping heavy Russian armor and choking supply lines. The Kremlin's propaganda apparatus immediately blamed the weather, claiming the stall was merely seasonal. However, military logic dictates that mud affects both sides equally. Yet while Russian forces bogged down, Ukrainian units began advancing. The weather stalled the front, but it cannot explain why Russia started losing ground. The answer lies in the shifting geography of the battlefield, specifically the iconic Ukrainian tree lines. For generations, these windbreaks preserved Ukraine's topsoil, turning it into the breadbasket of Europe. For 18 months, they also served as critical concealment for Russian infantry assault groups moving between open wheat fields, hiding them from Ukrainian reconnaissance drones. But by mid-2026, the tactical landscape changed. Ukraine scaled up its use of specialized Dragon drones, unmanned systems, carrying thermite and incendiary payloads. These drones systematically incinerated the windbreaks, stripping away the camouflage Russian infantry relied upon. Exposed in the open fields, Russian assault groups became easy targets. Crucially, Ukraine paired this environmental clearance with the mass deployment of Western-supplied smart cluster munitions and precision artillery. This forced the Russian command into a lethal dilemma: halt the infantry advances or march their troops into an open, high-definition kill zone. While the physical battlefield became a trap, the digital battlefield suffered a catastrophic stroke. Modern warfare is entirely dependent on real-time data, and for over a year, the Russian military had been cheating. Despite international sanctions, Russian frontline units operated their command and control networks using black market Starlink terminals smuggled through third-party nations. It was an open secret that kept the Kremlin's decentralized drone and artillery units synchronized. However, in early February 2026, after intense negotiations between SpaceX and Ukraine's Ministry of Digital Transformation, a sweeping digital embargo was enacted. The military fallout was instantaneous. Russian assaults fractured into uncoordinated, isolated skirmishes. According to the Pentagon, Ukraine capitalized on this digital blindness, immediately recapturing roughly 400 square kilometers of territory, while Russian units were unable to call for fire or request reinforcements. The Kremlin had spent months insisting its forces never utilize Starlink. But when the network died and their offensive collapsed overnight, the lie became unsustainable. To salvage the narrative, Moscow announced its homegrown satellite network, Rassvet, meaning dawn, promising commercial deployment by 2027. But the math tells a grimmer story. To rival Starlink, a constellation requires at least 250 operational satellites. By June 2026, Rassvet had just 16 satellites in orbit, one of which had already failed. Russian frontline commanders are now facing a severe command and control deficit that will extend well past 2027. To make matters worse, the Russian state dealt a severe self-inflicted blow to its remaining communication channels. Fearing domestic unrest and the spread of anti-war sentiments, the Russian state internet censor Roskomnadzor moved to throttle Telegram. The Ministry of Defense attempted to force troops onto a government-approved alternative called Max. But by early 2026, Max was exposed as a security nightmare riddled with critical vulnerabilities that left Russian coordinates vulnerable to Ukrainian cyber intercepts. The government was forced to backtrack, telling troops to return to Telegram, but the damage was done. This highlights a fatal feedback loop within the Kremlin strategy. As the battlefield situation worsens, domestic dissatisfaction grows. To curb dissent, the state clamps down on communications. But clamping down on communications degrades the army's efficiency, leading to further battlefield losses, which in turn fuels more domestic anger. While Russia's command structure was blinded and deafened, Ukraine went after the ultimate gravity center of the Russian war machine, its deep logistics. For years, the conventional strategy to defeat Russia focused on breaking the trench lines. But a trench is only as strong as the supply line feeding it. In 2026, Ukraine scaled up a highly sophisticated deep interdiction campaign utilizing long-range strike drones to paralyze Russia's extensive railway networks. By systematically destroying critical rail junctions, bridges, and switching yards dozens of kilometers behind the front, Ukraine severed the flow of artillery shells, fuel, and heavy armor developed by the Ukrainian defense firm Firepoint. The Flamingo earned its name from its distinctive pink anti-radar coating used during its initial rollout. The Flamingo is not a simple, slow-moving, loitering munition. It is an advanced heavy cruise missile powered by a low-cost turbojet engine. It reportedly delivers a massive 1,150 kilogram high explosive warhead across an operational range of nearly 3,000 kilometers. For the first time in the war, Ukraine possessed the domestic capability to bypass Russia's frontline defenses and strike heavily fortified industrial targets deep inside the Russian Federation. Confirmed Flamingo strikes have targeted the Votkinsk machine-building plant and major strategic arsenals belonging to Russia's main missile and artillery directorate. These deep strikes have severely disrupted Russia's domestic production of precision missiles and artillery tubes, starving the front line of the very weapons needed to sustain an offensive posture. To fund a war of this magnitude, a state needs an unyielding stream of capital. Between 2022 and 2026, Russia's military budgets reached historic highs, consuming over 40% of all public government spending. It is the largest financial undertaking since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Ukraine recognized that to stop the Russian army, they had to bankrupt the Kremlin. Throughout early 2026, Ukraine launched an aggressive, highly targeted drone campaign against Russia's economic lifeblood, its oil refineries and maritime export terminals. In April 2026 alone, Ukrainian drones successfully struck Russian oil infrastructure at least 21 times. The results were immediate and devastating. Russian refinery throughput plunged to its lowest level since December 2009, a 16-year low. The economic squeeze directly triggered a critical manpower crisis. The math of this war is unforgiving. An offensive force requires a significant numerical advantage to overrun fortified defensive lines. Crucially, Ukraine countered Russia's mass infantry tactics by integrating Western air defense systems like Patriot, IRIST, and NASAMS closer to the front line, establishing localized air superiority and denying Russian fighter bombers the ability to drop devastating glide bombs. Combined with Ukraine's massive edge in tactical FPV drone manufacturing, the Russian army lost its historical advantage in raw numbers and firepower. In early 2025, Russia had expanded its active deployment to 600,000 troops, but they found themselves facing an entrenched, technologically superior Ukrainian force that had grown to nearly 880,000 active personnel. Russia was being outproduced, outmanned, and outgunned on the modern battlefield. Where does this leave the war? The territorial reacquisitions achieved by Ukraine in mid-2026, amounting to a few hundred square kilometers, may seem modest compared to the sweeping Kharkiv counteroffensive of 2022, which liberated over 6,000 square kilometers in a matter of weeks. Ultimately, Ukraine does not need to launch high-risk, costly frontal assaults to liberate every inch of its soil overnight. By degrading Russia's command structures, paralyzing its energy economy, and attriting its manpower reserves, Kiev is forcing a slow, systemic collapse within the Russian Federation itself. The breaking of the Great Russian Offensive in mid-2026 proves that the war of attrition has turned against its architect. The initiative has shifted, and the Kremlin's clock is ticking. For more in-depth military analyses and daily updates on global geopolitics, make sure to subscribe. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next briefing.